In today's episode, I'm going to be sharing with you 5 ways that you can improve the engagement of your videos. I'm Angus Pike and welcome to the Marketing Your Practice podcast. Now, a couple of episodes ago, I spoke and shared with you all about why I think in 2020, attention is the commodity that you need to be really building. In fact, that'll be the practice that has the most attention that'll ultimately win. And I went as far as to say, if you're not actively building and encouraging attention in your community, you're risking irrelevance and you're risking failure in practice. Let me let you in on a secret. When it comes to getting attention, there's nothing better than video. However, things have changed over the last decade. In fact, they've changed over the last 2 years with regards to what's working with video. The kind of videos that used to work for us just a few years ago to get attention, to build trust, authority, and expertise in our communities aren't working anymore. So in today's episode, I'm going to share 5 really simple little tactics that'll help you improve the engagement of your videos. Now, the first thing I want you to think about is your background. Now, I see so many of you shooting videos, first of all, which is fantastic, but you're shooting videos in front of plain and boring background. So it's a plain gray or white or brown wall, and to be honest, it's boring. Now think about it for a moment. When we're on social media platforms, we're scrolling our way through and we're waiting for something to catch our eye. And if it's simply a talking head with a boring background, then chances are I'm going to flick past us. So for those of you that are watching this on video, the video version of the podcast, as you're looking behind me, it doesn't have to be complicated, but it is a white wall, but there's a contrasting picture there. You know, as I look behind me, it's got lots of purples and greens and oranges. Many of you have seen, I shoot lots of my videos here as well. I've got a little bit of a light in the background and some plants. Now, this is not some kind of Hollywood stage that we're sitting at, but at least it creates a little bit of visual contrast. Now, for many of you, the best spot for you to be shooting your videos is in your practice, but rather than there being a plain background, can you add a bit of color behind you? Is there a poster? Is there a picture? Is there something that'll at least gain the attention or the eye of the person that's watching? Now, this is one of the reasons, for instance, if you're making a video, perhaps sharing some food tips, then shoot that video in your kitchen. You know, shoot that video in an area that makes sense. Sometimes a pattern interrupt of shooting a video outside, walking along the beach, sitting on the park bench. These can be all kind of things that really catch the attention of your audience. And in catching their attention, they're going to stop the scroll and they continue to watch your video. So thing number 1 on what you're really thinking about is your background. When you're making a video, how can I add a little bit more attention to my background? Or how can I create a background that might actually have a little bit of a pattern interrupt? And it moves me into this next one, which is movement. When we think about our cavemen brains, they're really tuned in for movement. You know, we're walking through the savannah. If I see some movement out left or right, then my brain is going to go towards that. So how can we add more movement into videos? Now, one of the ways to do that is actually to begin your video with movement. So at the very beginning, again, for those of you that are watching this on video, you notice at the beginning of this podcast episode is actually me moving into frame. So instead of starting your video with you as I am at the moment, center of frame, then perhaps you could walk into the frame. Maybe you could do the beginning of your video actually walking along. One of my clients inside the Community Influencer Coaching Program, Chris Cameron. Chris does a great job with this. He often starts his videos actually moving in selfie style. Now that movement there catches my caveman brain. I see the movement there, and that's the thing that's most likely going to stop the scroll. Last year, I talked to you a little bit about a book that I read. There's a video editing or video production group who spend all of their time actually helping big companies create viral videos. And they spend 95% of their efforts on the first 7 seconds of a video. If a video is going to go viral, it's all about the first 7 seconds. And so, you know, what we've started with in essence is having a background that's engaging, that's intriguing, that's flat out not boring, and adding movement into it as well. So when we add movement to our videos, as I talked about before, it's much more likely to be engaging. Now, on to our third one, and these next couple here are all about actually, you know, other ways of us adding in movement, and that is for you to add in B-roll. Now, B-roll is alternate footage. So if I'm sitting here talking to you at the moment about having a holiday down at the beach and imagining yourself sitting on soft white, warm sand and the water licking in. Instead of just having me on film here, we could add in some B-roll. So we could get some stock footage of a beautiful beach and water kind of licking in across the sand there. And it starts to add other levels of emotion. Now the B-roll, because you could also be talking about an exercise or cooking or setting up your desk, and instead of just having you talking about it, we could have some alternate footage of you actually showing this actually happening. So I was watching a video from the amazing Dr. Tony Rose a couple of weeks ago, and Tony was talking about some exercises. I think they were Superman exercises from memory. He was talking through how to do them. And then what he'd also done is he'd set his camera up beforehand and he'd filmed himself doing those exercises. And then when he was talking through, okay, you lie down on your tummy, you lift your hands up, you hold it for 10 or 15 seconds, he just inserted that footage. So seeing the exercise being done as opposed to Tony just describing it being done, there was movement that was happening, things were changing on the film, it was much more engaging. So the fancy word for that is B-roll. There are plenty of places online that you can get free B-roll. In fact, I would do a search for free B-roll. So it's B for banana. But there are also sites like artlist.io. In fact, I'll list a few in the show notes of where you can find free and paid B-roll. So the best way I think for you to get your B-roll though is for you to actually shoot it yourself. So as I mentioned before, Tony did it. He shot some alternate angles to himself. Now that alternate angle brings me on to point number 4, and that is many times you can add an alternate angle. So at the moment I'm shooting this with just one camera here in front of me, but I could have easily just set up my iPhone, put it over on the other angle here, and as I'm talking, I could occasionally cut to the other angle. I do that in lots of my podcast episodes. I'm sure you've done that beforehand. Most of us have 2 cameras. We've got an old phone lying around. We've got the one that we use all the time, or you might have a camera like I am now. Just set that alternate angle up, and occasionally just swapping to another angle is a great way for you to add movement to the screen. And adding movement to the screen, we're triggering that primal brain. Remember, we look for movement all the time, and it adds a level of professionalism. We see this all the time on television interviews. Many times what we want to do is we want to mimic what we see happen on television, particularly television interviews. And they have all these things that look really fancy, but they're really quite simple. So adding in a second camera and a second camera angle can be a great way to add movement. Now, if you don't have a second camera angle, then the thing that you can do is that you can constantly change the focus of the video. In fact, the focus is not better, it's probably the cropping of the video. So Jason, my video editor, as he's editing this right now, Jason, can you do a zoom in on me? And then we'll do a zoom out. And then we're just changing the cropping a little bit. So in changing that cropping, it can sometimes look like there are a couple of different camera angles. And Jason does this with my videos all the time. But these second camera angles or the change in the cropping actually add movement. And as I've said many times, the adding of movement to the videos is what keeps the brain stimulated all the time. Now, the 5th and final thing that you can do or add to your videos to really improve engagement is music. Music is one of those things that really amplifies the feel of a video. So if your video is very serious and somber in nature, then finding a music that has that same tone will amplify the feel of your video, and vice versa. If your video is very up-tempo, then find a music that matches that will again amplify the feel of your video. Be careful though, because you need to make sure that you're using video that you're allowed to use. You can't just grab Beyonce's latest track and add it to your video. Many of the social media platforms have a level of artificial intelligence that's actually listening to the videos. And if they find tracks on there that you're not allowed to use, then they simply won't let you put that video up online. But there are plenty of places, both paid and free, where you can find music, and I'll link to some in the show notes. Be careful not to have the music too loud though, okay? Sometimes I'm listening to videos and the music actually becomes distracting. So keep that music just down in the background there. It doesn't need to go through all the video. For instance, this podcast episode, we have some music at the beginning and then it slowly starts to fade out after about a minute. So let's recap on all 5 of those things that you can do to add engagement to your video. First thing is think about your background. No boring white, grey, plain backgrounds. How can you, number 2, add some movement into your video? Can you walk into frame to begin with? Can you actually be moving along selfie style while you're actually making the video there? Thing number 3 is to add some B-roll. What other footage would make sense for you to add to your videos while you're making them? Plenty of spots that you can get free B-roll, plenty of spots you can get paid B-roll, or as I mentioned, just shoot it yourself. Okay, thing number 4 was what I want you doing is an alternate angle. Grab your other phone or similar device, shoot it off to the side there, start them at the same time, and then you can cut occasionally to that alternate angle, or you can change the framing, which just means it changes the focus point. Again, it's all about movement. And then the final thing is add music, okay? Music is a really great thing that adds feel and amplifies the emotion of your video. Now, along with music, you could also be, sound effects. Sometimes they're appropriate. Adding those 5 things to your video will really stimulate the brain of the people who are watching more. It'll have them be much more likely to be engaged all the way through your video so they can hear your fantastic message. Remember, in 2020, the commodity that you want to be building is attention. Nothing builds it better than video, and these 5 things will help to make your video better. Gang, until next time, thanks for all that you do. Keep saving lives. I'll see you back here next week. Bye. If you enjoyed listening to this podcast, you have to come and check out the Community Influencer Program. It's my monthly coaching program where we take all this material and I'll work one-on-one with you to apply, implement, systematize, and help guide you and your practice to the next level. Now you can join me over at adiomedia.com/join. That's adiomedia.com/join. I'd love to see you in there.